Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. We hear from local students as hundreds gather at universities to support Palestinians amid the war in Gaza. And our Spotlight Politics team looks at the future of a constitutional amendment on abortion and more. But now to some of today's top stories. Protesters who are planning to demonstrate during the Democratic National Convention this summer are taking their concerns to court. The city of Chicago has denied permits to protest outside the secure perimeter of the United Center requested by the U.S. Palestinian Community Network and the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. In the federal lawsuit, the groups are asking a judge to block the city from enforcing its ordinance regulating parade permits, claiming it violates protesters' First Amendment rights.
This is why we're marching on the DNC. The powers that be, led by genocide Joe Biden, have totally abandoned the working and oppressed people they claim to represent. They can no longer bully us into voting for the so-called lesser of two evils, because as far as we're concerned, there is no lesser of two evils when the two evils are united in aiding a genocide.
Transit workers say a plan to merge the region's 3 transit agencies into one is on the wrong track. In a statement, the presidents of the Chicago Federation of Labor and the Illinois AFL-CIO say, quote, "We must caution that consolidating our vital regional transit boards into a singular centralized entity would erect a web of bureaucratic barriers between the workers who both operate and utilize our public transit system and the board members tasked with overseeing its success." The groups are responding to a proposal from 2 state lawmakers to merge CTA, Metra, PACE, and the Regional Transportation Authority into a new Metropolitan Mobility Authority. We'll have more on that proposal coming up in Spotlight Politics. Some local Congress members are backing legislation aimed at addressing a hidden health hazard in Chicago homes. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin and Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia are reintroducing the Lead Safe Housing for Kids Act. The bill would require the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to update its lead poisoning prevention measures in federally assisted housing. Supporters say the current law focuses too much on visual assessments and should instead use risk assessments to identify lead paint hazards. Lead poisoning can cause long-term and irreversible health problems in children. Up next, university students talk about protests on campus right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jin and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Hundreds of college students across the country, including Chicago, are pitching tents on campuses and rallying in support of Palestinians amid the war in Gaza. The move comes 6 months after the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. The demonstrations on college campuses have led to concerns over free speech and safety. While protests continue, Northwestern University just yesterday announced an agreement they say provides a sustainable path forward. Others say that's not the case. Joining us now with more are Sari Eisen, a student at Northwestern University and president of Northwestern Hillel. We also reached out to the Northwestern University Divestment Coalition, who recommended Paz Baum, a student with the university's chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace and part of the coalition. Thanks to the two of you for joining us. Paz, I want to start with you, please. Why do you feel that these sorts of protests, that the demonstrations that are happening are necessary?
I would like to start out by thanking you for having me here today, and also by saying Free Palestine. That is the reason that I do my work and the reason that we are here today. My work with the Divestment Coalition is incredibly informed by my Jewish identity and the values with which I was raised. I was taught that being Jewish means being in solidarity with all oppressed people. The Jewish people are united by the fact that we faced genocide and displacement for centuries. My own great-grandparents fled pogroms in Eastern Europe to come to the US. That is why I am fighting for the 34,000 Palestinians who've been murdered since October and the over 1 million more who are facing displacement right now, and why I'm calling for an immediate ceasefire and on Northwestern to disclose and divest their financial investments in the Israeli war machine.
And while sticking with you for just a second, and then Sari will come to you as well. Paz, what's the mood been like on campus today, and what's the status of the encampment?
It is a very joyous time. We are incredibly proud of the agreement that our Jewish and Palestinian students came to with university administration. The university is now legally bounded to an agreement that they need to disclose all financial investments in any stock, including Israel, and that is a foothold in moving towards divestment from genocide and apartheid.
And I definitely want to get to the terms of that agreement in just a bit. But Sari, same question to you. What would you say the mood is like on campus and the status of the encampment?
Yeah, as far as I know, most of the tents have been packed up after yesterday's announcement that no tents are no longer allowed on the university property. For the Jewish students that I'm in contact with, those who have a large connection to Israel, those who feel connected to that to some extent, we were definitely feeling unsafe the past few days. There were signs that had a Jewish star with a big no through it, like the no pets sign. Yeah, so a Jewish star with the red line through it. There was a picture of our university president, President Michael Schill, who is a Jewish person himself, with devil horns. There was "Death to Israel" spray painted on the side of a building. So those posters and slogans did not make Jewish students feel welcome or safe on campus. I had to walk by that on my way to class. I know a lot of my peers did as well. And it was disruptive to the academic environment as well. A lot of classes, either the TA or the professor brought their classes to the protest, which made some students in those classes feel really uncomfortable if that was not something that they support themselves. So for the most part, Jewish students were feeling pretty uncomfortable, unsafe, and are a little bit relieved to see a lot of that gone. There's still a lot of work to do with anti-Semitism on campus, with addressing kind of how we can include all Jewish voices in the Jewish community on campus. But for the most part, relieved to see that was gone.
So as we mentioned yesterday, the Divestment Coalition did reach an agreement with the university. A little bit of what those agreement terms are to allow demonstrations on Deering Meadow until June 1st. The location is limited to university community members, a reestablishment of the Advisory Committee on Investment Responsibility happening this fall, support visiting Palestinian faculty and students at risk, and ensuring support for Jewish and Muslim students within student affairs, religious and spiritual life. Paz, first to you, does this satisfy the requests of the demonstrators?
For right now, we are incredibly happy and proud with this deal. As I mentioned, the fact that the university is now legally bound to disclosing their financial investments mean that we can push toward divestment. The other terms of the agreement allow for support of Muslim, Palestinian, Jewish students on campus. And that means that the university is now invested in their students, in students of all backgrounds and all religions.
We received a statement late this afternoon from the Anti-Defamation League as well. That group, along with several other groups, released a statement who called for the resignation of the university's president, Michael Schill. Here's a little bit of what they had to say. Quote, "For days, protesters openly mocked and violated Northwestern's codes of conduct and policies by erecting an encampment in which they fanned the flames of anti-Semitism and wreaked havoc on the entire university community. Their goal was not to find peace, but to make Jewish students feel unsafe on campus. Rather than hold them accountable, as he pledged he would, President Schill gave them a seat at the table and normalized their hatred against Jewish students." And I should clarify that in that statement, the groups are calling for the resignation of the university president. Sari, what is your response to the agreement that was reached yesterday and to what you're hearing from the ADL?
Yeah, for the most part, there are a lot of points on the agreement that I support, that the Hillel community supports as a whole. And we were also pretty disappointed to see that acts of blatant anti-Semitism, the chants, the signs, all of that was not specifically addressed in the agreement. We have been voicing our concerns about anti-Semitism on campus since October 7th, since before October 7th. There have been many incidents in which students have felt uncomfortable expressing their Jewish identity, expressing their connection to Israel, and when asking students to kind of separate a part of their Jewish identity, that feels really targeted and really anti-Semitic, and a lot of that was not addressed in the agreement. Hillel is lucky to have a great partnership with the university. We're in constant contact with administration, and we have a lot of people who care about the Jewish community on campus, but there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of that.
Do you feel like the students from the Hillel were not included in this agreement, in this discussion?
As far as I know, there were no students who felt no Jewish students who felt unsafe by these protests included on the negotiations. So we were a bit disappointed to see that that voice was kind of left out of this. And Hillel as a whole, Hillel staff, Hillel, like students who come to Hillel, were not involved in these negotiations.
Paz, there's been talk about like disruption of daily activities on university campuses who are experiencing these encampments. Obviously, students not feeling safe, but also students not being able to get to class or to whatever academic buildings they need to be in. Is that kind of disruption to daily activities? Is that just sort of a part of the demonstration and the protest process?
Our goal with this encampment and this liberated zone was to put pressure on the university administration to disclose and divest their harmful investments. As a Jewish student, I felt incredibly safe, seen, and heard as a part of this encampment. We had several religious celebrations. Myself and two of my peers led a Seder on the encampment on Thursday. We had Shabbat services, and I felt this is the most connected I have felt to my faith, and the more supported I felt in my faith since coming to Northwestern as being part of this encampment, because we had such a wonderful, wonderful community that was built to be part of this encampment. I would tell you the only time that I felt unsafe as a Jewish student at Northwestern as part of this encampment was when a group of counter-protesters came Sunday morning, and they were joined by Hillel Executive Director Michael Simon. And many of these protesters tried to come into the encampment, and several of them were screaming in our faces, using slurs and spitting on Jewish and Palestinian Northwestern students. I was on the front line holding a sign that said Jews for ceasefire, and several of these counter-protesters came into my face and were screaming anti-Semitic phrases at me. And that is the only time I've ever felt unsafe as a Jewish student.
Are you familiar with like some of what Sari has mentioned with regards to like some of the chants that you've heard and some of like the drawings that you've seen? Are you familiar with some of those? Have you heard those? Or are you saying that they're only from the counter-protesters, not from the people who are with your group, with your coalition?
We understand that some Jewish students at Northwestern feel uncomfortable by the encampment and the protest. And I want to acknowledge that I want to acknowledge the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. This was a explicitly anti-Zionist protest, and some of these symbols, such as the Star of David, have been co-opted by some Jewish symbols, such as the Star of David, have been co-opted by the Israeli government to be used as part of a genocidal government and military. And that is now being conflated with my Jewish identity. And I think it is a tragedy of Zionism that there are symbols that are being used by the Israeli military that, to me, represent only my faith.
Sari, we've got just a couple seconds left, but I want to give you a chance to respond to what you just heard from Paz.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the part of the counter-protest, like most of the counter-protest, was organized by non-students. So that was not organized by Jewish students on campus, and Hillel Executive Director was not part of the protest. He was kind of organizing students, making sure everything felt safe for everyone involved. So I'm sorry that people felt unsafe for that. And I think that while the symbols like the Jewish star and the President Shill with the horns may have been thought of as not making Jewish students feel unsafe, the way that they were represented really made Jewish students feel excluded from the rest of campus feel like they couldn't go to class. We couldn't sit in Deering Library because a lot of the chants were calling for the annihilation of a Jewish state, and that made Jewish students feel really uncomfortable.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thanks to the two of you for joining us and for having this discussion. Best of luck to you both, Sari Eisen and Posbaum from Northwestern University. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, our Spotlight Politics team on the public financing piece of the Bears' proposed multi-billion-dollar stadium. Stay with us. A former mayoral candidate is going to bat for a convicted alderman. Meanwhile, state lawmakers are back in Springfield debating a proposal to merge Chicago's 3 public transit agencies. And the Chicago Bears are also hoping lawmakers will approve public financing for a lakefront stadium. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Nick Blumberg. I know how to say your name. Welcome. I do, I promise. Welcome back, gang. Okay, so we've got to start off with convicted former Alderman Ed Burke. He's set to be sentenced on those 13 counts of bribery in federal court in late June. Leading up to that, of course, he's gathering letters of support. Heather, you got a hold of one of those letters. What did it say?
That's right. Former mayoral candidate Paul Vallis wrote a letter urging U.S. District Court Judge Virginia Kendall to grant him whatever leniency she saw fit. And this really caught my eye because if you remember back in 2019, Paul Vallis campaigned for the mayor the first time around while wielding a giant broom, promising to root out corruption in City Hall. But now he says, quote, Ed was a true professional whom I always felt met my standards of ethics, and that he truly cared not only for his own constituents, but for all of Chicago. This is quite a turnaround. Now, I caught Paul Vallis briefly on the phone. He said that they always worked well together under former Mayor Richard M. Daley, and he was reaching out as a friend to urge leniency because, of course, Ed Burke is 80 and potentially facing many years in prison.
And I did think it was interesting, hearing him say he always cared for everyday Chicagoans. In 2019, when Vallis was running for mayor, I went back and looked at the recording we had of his press conference after Burke had been indicted, saying that he was part of this political machine that had real costs to the city of Chicago's everyday citizens because of the political class's greed. He went after Burke for, quote, hubris and carelessness. And he also said that as city budget director, he did very little work with the finance committee, which Burke headed for a long time. Now he says Ed was always supportive of my reforms. His support and advice was very comforting.
And did Vallis have that broom with him for that press conference?
Oh, he sure did.
I thought so.
The handy broom. Okay, so lawmakers back in Springfield today, one pretty radical item on their agenda is a proposal to merge the Chicago area's 3 public transit agencies. We mentioned the union response earlier in the show. Also, a dramatic increase in funding in that proposal. Nick, how would this new system work?
Well, this would replace the Regional Transportation Authority, which many critics say hasn't done much to actually regionalize public transit. And it would merge CTA, Metra, and PACE, so commuter rail, city and collar suburb bus and train service, and suburban bus and paratransit, all under one roof. They would also do fare integration, meaningful fare integration, which is something that people have been looking for a long time. Right now, say you take the train from the north side into downtown and then hop on the Metro Electric. you can't just transfer the way you would if you took the Red Line downtown and got on a CTA bus. They also want to push this system to move away from the idea of commuter rail more toward regional rail. This is something we've already been seeing Metro do as they try to recover ridership post-pandemic with more like off-peak trips, weekend trips, things like that. They also, one item that caught my eye in there is they want to make sure that directors have, quote, substantial ridership experience. They would track and publish the number of transit trips that the directors on the board of this new authority take, which follows on some great reporting from Block Club Chicago about the lack of transit ridership from CTA leaders and board members.
Interesting point they make there. What kind of reaction is this proposal getting there?
Well, there are a lot of questions here, understandably. You mentioned that increase in funding. That would be $1.5 billion new dollars annually. They've got some language in the legislation about the sources for that: sales tax, gas tax, off-street parking, things like that. But that's sort of a placeholder piece, it seems like. So, you know, we've been hearing from folks who are really excited about this, who wanted this for a long time. Obviously, we heard that pushback from a couple influential union groups. We've also heard concerns that this could create a fight for money between the city and the suburbs, and that could ultimately harm riders in the city, low-income folks, Black and Latino Chicagoans who really rely on this. You know, with some critics saying, if we don't do the funding piece, this is just an unfunded mandate, essentially.
Amanda, how's this going to fly in Springfield?
I mean, I think it's quite early. The governor is one who really, I think we have to care a lot about how he feels on this, because he is a governor and also a strong governor at that. He gives a lot of money to Democrats. They're going to basically take his lead. And he is not overly impressed, it seems. He's trying to take a step back from all of this and says that he hopes there's going to be multiple proposals at his fingertips to sort of perhaps at least review. So he's super non-committal. He has been against the sales tax on services, so that's sort of a non-starter from that point of view, but he has said that there do need to be major changes. He'd come out against Dorville Carter, calling for a change at the head of the CTA as well. So clearly he's wanting transit action, but he's not at this point willing to get out in front.
Okay, so shifting a little bit to, so after Roe was overturned, speaking of Governor Pritzker, he and other top officials talked about adding an amendment to the Illinois Constitution, protecting the right to abortion. And you've reported that that's not going to happen, Amanda. Why not?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. And that is interesting because the governor included it as one of his goals for the second term in his big address when he was inaugurated as his second term as governor. Instead, he is going to be putting his money and therefore attention, it seems, via this dark money group, Think Big Illinois. We don't know who else is part of that other than, so far, him, to other states. And this seems as if most of the advocates for abortion rights are pretty on board, because they say Illinois already has so many laws in place that give those sort of protections that focus on the states that don't, where it's more iffy, where you don't have, frankly, Democratic control as there is in Illinois. That said, we have seen you can not easily, but still, I mean, a constitutional amendment is one thing that's difficult to change. A law, that can be changed pretty easily. So if there were to be any political turnover, this is sort of, I guess, sort of rolling the dice and expecting really that there isn't going to be a change in power and that any of those laws protecting abortion won't be reversed.
So a couple minutes left. I want to talk about the Bears because they're asking for a lot of money. Amanda, how have Illinois lawmakers responded to the Bears asking for more than $1 billion in public financing?
Yeah.
It's not good.
Am I done with that response, perhaps?
We're done. Next spotlight, everybody.
I mean, I guess that it is just because you want something. I mean, the Bears want to win the Super Bowl. A lot of Bears fans want that too. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. So I think that thus far there has been a lot of, I think, frustration with this rollout. You haven't seen any legislator getting in front and embrace it and say, I'm going to carry this bill. You already have those from the suburbs that are frustrated, perhaps, by leaving Arlington Heights behind and still holding out hope for that. So just because the mayor may be liking this, I don't think you're having a whole lot of other politicians, particularly those in Springfield, give any sort of favorability toward this plan.
So, Heather and Nick, last week the Bears asked the Illinois Sports Financing Authority for $900 million to build this stadium, with taxpayers, still on the hook for about $600 million that it would cost, or that it did cost, to renovate Soldier Field back in 2003. what happens now.
Well, the governor's chief of staff and deputy governor are set to sit down with the Bears tomorrow, Grains has reported. That will be the first real substantive meeting on this, but there's going to be a lot of steps that come after this. It is nowhere near a done deal. The state agency that oversees these bonds is going to have to do an analysis. So this is not happening this legislative session, or maybe ever, question mark?
Although the Bears really want action as soon as possible, it just doesn't seem politically feasible, because once you figure out what the subsidy should be and how it should get there, you still have to talk about whether it should be built on the lakefront, a major question.
Which they're also going to have to answer that to the Friends of the Parks, especially. That is Spotlight. Thank you, team. Heather Sharon, Amanda Vinicki, Nick Blumberg. See, I said it right. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. A new report finds Black Illinois residents are far more likely to become homeless than their white counterparts. And Chaz Ebert tells us why we should give a feck. That's F-E-C-K, and it's nicer than it sounds. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.